Silent Hill Origins, the first Silent Hill game on a handheld console, and the first to be developed outside of Japan. For some, it's seen as the beginning of the end, as the series moved westward and modernized. For others, it was their introduction to the series, released alongside the film that brought countless new fans to the games, myself included. However you see it, it's clear that Origins is a pivotal part of the history of the series, and a controversial one, with a complicated development history. It's the game that almost wasn't, and the events that led to the final product reveal a lot about the series and the company that created it. But what exactly did happen to Silent Hill Origins? To figure out the true series of events that led to the game's final release, we'll jump back in time and work through the articles, interviews, and press releases that reveal how and why Konami went westward and the consequences that followed. Climax LA was a studio located in Santa Monica, California, a branch of the larger UK-based Climax Studios. They opened in 2003 and had 3 games under their belt by 2005. Tron 2.0, originally a PC game that the studio adapted to Xbox, ATV Off-Road Fury, a PSP racing game, and a Lizzie McGuire game for the Game Boy Advanced. Around 2005, they would also be working on an Elder Scrolls game for the PSP, and a Ghost Rider game to be released alongside the film that next summer. The PSP was a pretty new console at the time. Released in Japan in December of '04, it was only a year old when Konami went scouting for possible developers. What they wanted was a portable Silent Hill game. Silent Hill 5, which would become Homecoming, was already in development as a console game elsewhere. And in Japan, a team led by Yamaoka Akira and Tsubayama Musashi were working on yet another Silent Hill game. Konami was going hard after the PSP. Multiple titles were already developed for it, including Metal Gear Portable Ops and the Silent Hill Experience, which was a multimedia gallery meant to advertise the film. And they not only wanted PSP experience for their new game, they wanted a Western team. The previously released Silent Hill 4 had sunk the nail into the Japanese development coffin. It had bombed in Japan, continuing a downward trend of Japanese Silent Hill sales, which likely led leadership at Konami to consider that if Western fans were the only people buying it, why wouldn't you want Western developers making it? So Climax LA was chosen. They were in the United States, and they had PSP experience. In December of 2005, production on the Silent Hill PSP game began. It seems to have been called Silent Hill Next at one point, and Original Sin at another, though Origins would eventually become the title. At the helm on the Konami side was William Ortel, producer of Origins, Silent Hill 5, and Silent Hill: The Experience. He began in the industry in 1997 at Activision and worked as a producer on at least 12 projects before Origins began. Interviews seem to portray his role as the go-to between Konami and Climax, as well as the developer of many of the main concepts of the game and the general focus of its story. Ortel had experience with Silent Hill. He discusses previous games with first-hand knowledge, and his first idea was to remake the first Silent Hill game on the PSP. Eventually, they'd change directions. Probably a good idea, since the first game would head to the PlayStation Network in 2009. It seemed remaking the game to fit on a handheld device required a lot of changes, and Ortel decided doing something new, something fans would be surprised by, would be a better idea. But given they'd already started with the first game, a prequel seemed like the logical next step. Still, Ortel was a big fan of the psychological aspects of Silent Hill 2, and wanted to have the best of both worlds, the atmosphere, characters, and locations of the first game, with the heavier psychological themes of the second. You can see that influence in early concepts, such as this video of Travis taking James's place in the bathroom scene that opens Silent Hill 2. It even has the same figure painted on the wall. But there are a lot of other new things as well, such as a heavy focus on knives and meat hooks. From early on, this focus on butchering was present, and multiple locations would play into the idea. There was a meat-packing plant, as well as a butcher's shop. Early monsters are grotesque and visceral, looking as if they've been cut open, or as if they'll cut you. This, alongside a budding storyline about a truck driver with mental health issues and delusions, fits with what would eventually become the darker ending of the final game. It's likely the idea of Travis as a serial killer was there all along, or at least some spin on the concept. Ortel even drops hints at this in interviews, where he says Travis isn't bothered by the violence or the monsters and easily adapts to it for reasons relating to his past. The focus on mirrors and on the Flauros was also present very early, though the movement through the mirrors isn't shown in early concepts. There's a woman present inside the mirrors who communicates with Travis, though who she is isn't clear. From December until May of 2006, the game was in the conceptual stages and unknown to the public eye. What can be drawn from concept art revealed at the time, and from unreleased footage found years later, paints the picture of a very dark, very violent version of Silent Hill, with a heavy focus on action which might play into Travis's possibly violent background. It reminds me somewhat of The Evil Within, a game that plays like the hybrid love child of Silent Hill and Resident Evil. Of course, it's barely in the conceptual stages at this point, and had a long way to go to be a finished project. Silent Hill Origins was revealed to the world at E3 in 2006 as a trailer at Konami's press conference. There was also some concept art made public, but no playable version of the game was available. The trailer is quite chilling. Haunting scenes play alongside eerie music, courtesy of Yamaoka, and some hints at a plot appear. Travis stares into a mirror, where a woman's face and the symbol of the Flauros suddenly appear and stun him, breaking the mirror. Wheelchairs, bodies hung from meat hooks, and a long hallway with what seems to be pictures of Silent Hill characters and locations from the past all make an appearance. What is noticeably absent, however, is playable sections of game. The entire thing is scripted or pre-rendered. None of it looks like gameplay. That's fine for an early concept trailer, but conversations and interviews at the event imply the game is much further along. The release date, in fact, was originally supposed to be that year, according to some accounts. None of them actually agree, however. Every interview and article had a different release date, from in the coming months, winter 2006, Christmas, early 2007, or next year. Uh-oh. That doesn't seem like a good sign. Some facts about the gameplay were shared in interviews and articles with Ortel. He describes a few major new features for the game, including a barricade system that would allow the player to interact with the environment and create obstacles or even safe zones where monsters would not get to them. It sounds like a twist on the Clock Tower 3 system where players could spring traps to daze their pursuers. It also had a Cineractive system, an interactive button response minigame that would allow players to react to major events, very similar to the system that's in the final game. This original version, however, sounds much, much bigger. In various interviews, Ortel describes it in incredible detail. You're going to have to do button presses and movements to avoid or react to the monster that is attacking you. That's going to lead into custom animations, custom camera angles, and custom actions that you're not going to see throughout the game. So there will be a sequence of a monster attacking you, and you'll have to move to the side, then run over here and pop one in the back of his head and then run over here. You know, little scripted sequences that you have control over, that if you don't initiate the right sequence, you're going to die or something else is going to happen. Uh-oh? This is where early interviews started to lose me. An action-oriented Silent Hill was one thing. Popping monsters in the back of the head, ducking and weaving like a Resident Evil character through the environment, that did not sound right. Add to the fact that these systems are described differently in multiple articles, to the point that some described this interactive system as a combat-only option, while others didn't make it clear. It seems many of the concepts behind the games weren't that clear at all, and we still hadn't seen any of them in action. They were all described in interviews by the producer. There was so much this game was going to have. It was going to be so big and so interactive. Yet none of that was being shown. There was just some concept art and one trailer. Just what was going on? There was no new information until August, when the European Games Convention in Leipzig was held. This was where the first playable demo was revealed, and suddenly the problems were vividly, pointedly obvious. Articles at the time were actually pretty kind about the project, but all of them said it was clear there was more work to be done. The demos did not look anything like a near-finished project or something set to release within a few months. It was dismal, and more importantly for Silent Hill fans, it revealed exactly how combat-heavy the game was. Combat was all the demo showed. Articles discussed the number of available weapons, combat commands, the camera, an over-the-shoulder RE4 style that abandoned the staple fixed camera angles of Silent Hill, and most controversially of all, the laser sight attached to one of the guns. The Silent Hill forums exploded with anger and shock at the idea of a Silent Hill game with a laser sight, and it was just a symptom of the larger problem. For all the fascinating hints at a plot found in the earliest concepts, the actual game itself showed none of that depth or detail. It was a Resident Evil 4 clone with Silent Hill set dressing, and a poor one at that. How had those fascinating concepts and months of work turned into this? More than having angered Silent Hill fans, the demo left a bad taste in nearly everyone's mouths. Few had much positive to say about the game anymore, and Konami was coming looking for answers. It would fall on Climax LA's head, and by October 19th, articles were published revealing the outcome. The office in Santa Monica was downgraded to a subordinate status to the main office in the UK, and 14 to 16 people were laid off, depending on the article you read. Only a few days later, another article would reveal more in-depth details. A Kotaku expose with a mole from the company revealed the whole thing was because of Silent Hill Origins. Management in charge of the project had dropped the ball early on, leading to the team working without a game engine until June of 2006, which explained why no material before then had any playable portions, and why the August demo was so lackluster. The management was apparently so bad that the lead designer and lead artist both left of their own volition during the project. This may be referring to Vanessa Miles and Jeremy Parker, Climax LA hires from a year before. Parker left Climax LA in August 2006, and would go on to work on multiple God of War games as a designer. Miles has unfortunately vanished from the games industry. It may also be referring to Matt Sophos, a lead designer on the project who would go on to be a writer and story lead on none other than God of War, one of the most beloved video games of recent years. What is with this Silent Hill Origins God of War pipeline? Because of all these issues, the project was constantly being cut back, and all of this was hidden from Konami's management, likely referring to William Ortel and those above him. It was all finally revealed a few weeks before, likely because of the lackluster demo at the Games Convention. An interview with the president of Climax Studios a month later would make things clearer. Carl Jeffrey had been part of Climax as the CEO for over 20 years and is still a chairman at the company today. In the article, he discusses the move to open a studio in the United States. He actually moved to LA to oversee the project and found he'd bitten off more than he could chew, trying to oversee both the UK and USA, dealing with higher expenses in the competitive market of Los Angeles, led him to feeling like an administrator rather than a game developer. Earlier that year, the company would sell one of its studios in Brighton, earning enough money to fall back on, and beginning the transition towards focusing on development solely in the UK, where Jeffrey would move back to. "I'm happier than I've been for a long time," he would say. All of this matches the strange public life of Silent Hill Origins in its early days. Lots of promise and possibility of so many features that weren't shown in any playable form, as well as a singular trailer with a lot of creepy moments, but no solid gameplay, cutscenes, or story beats. Later content revealed online would show some of these details, including storyboards, short unfinished cutscenes, and even fuller details of the plotline. It involved the cult and a Mr. Twilight, who was Dr. Kaufman behind a mask. On the whole, it was a project clearly manned with some folks with incredible talent, who weren't given the resources necessary to fulfill the project's needs. And it was a project with elements that felt very out of place in the Silent Hill universe, far too action-focused and interactive. Heavier combat is one thing. A shoulder camera and laser sights with extended interactive combat sequences was quite another. What would happen to Silent Hill Origins? For months, the story would go silent. Some fan blogs and websites would wonder if the project had been canned entirely, and fans feared for the worst when in February 2007, Konami's annual Gamers Day revealed nothing about Silent Hill Origins. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. The project instead found its way to Climax Solent, another Climax studio back in the UK. Ortel would still be the producer, alongside associate producer Tom Hewlett, while the game would be directed by Mark Simmons and written by Sam Barlow. Once they had their hands on Silent Hill Origins, the team made the decision to go to Konami and request a do-over, permission to rewrite and remake as much of the game as they could. They had their own vision for the project, one truer to the original gameplay style with less focus on action. Konami gave the go-ahead on one condition: they would receive no extra time and no extra budget. The game was set to release in November of 2007, and the team in the UK received the project somewhere between September and October of 2006, which meant they had little less than 1 year to finish the game with no extra budget to work with. This meant that a lot of the game was already set in stone. Pre-rendered cutscenes, character models, locations, and other graphic assets that had already been made had to be used. They didn't have the time and money to rebuild everything. The plot was basically set in stone since the major cutscenes were built. A truck driver arrives in Silent Hill and becomes involved with Alessa and the cult. But you can see where changes were made. The scene in the beginning where Travis pulls his truck over reveals a dark shadow in front of the vehicle. In the original version, this was Mr. Twilight. In the final version, this was changed to Alessa. The figure in the mirror would also become Alessa, a plot device that makes little sense given the timeline of the games, but which was necessary to cover the cracks where the original plotline involving new characters was removed. Sam Barlow apparently rewrote the story in a week, creating connections that were previously absent. The asylum level of the game had no connection to the overall plot, so Barlow added the backstory of Travis's mother and her mental illness. More than anything, the remade version of Silent Hill Origins would look like Silent Hill. Gone was that heavy action focus in the Resident Evil 4 camera. Gone was the laser sight and the gamey on-screen elements. The game was now covered in filters and static. It had fixed angles and awkward controls, and while combat was relatively heavy, it's not as heavy as it was. Dynamic lighting, shadows, and reflections would add to the ambiance and receive a lot of commendations in articles after the game was re-revealed. A new playable demo would be available at San Diego Comic-Con that July, where it was nominated for Best Handheld, and lost to The Legend of Zelda: Phantom Hourglass. It would also appear again at the European Games Convention, where it would receive another awards nomination for Best of PSP. A Silent Hill fan site moderator at the event would cover the changes in the game. After seeing what Silent Hill Origins looked like in 2006, I was a bit skeptical. Then I saw in April '07 the overhaul that it had undergone, and I needed to play it. I was so excited when I finally ran to the Konami booth as soon as I got onto the show floor, and when I finally got to play it, it was everything I thought it would be. As a Silent Hill fan, a horror fan, and a gamer, I have to say it was a stunning demo. Around that same time, the demo would actually be leaked online. A copy of the game meant for marketing purposes was published online near the end of August, and the reactions in forums and Silent Hill fan sites was overwhelmingly positive. The attitude had been grim and defeatist after the lackluster demo and months of silence. Now fans were excited again, and felt as if their favorite haunted town was really coming back. Japanese fans felt similarly. At the Tokyo Game Show that year, one article on Silent Hill Origins discussed the changes with avid excitement. The demo was playable on a raised platform, which the reporters were escorted to by a nurse, and included a large TV playing the trailer. Rather than being upset the game was in Western hands, the reporter was excited at how Hollywood it all was. During this time, the staff credits flowed, and the production was as if it were the beginning of a Hollywood movie. Only Silent Hill, which was actually made into a movie in the United States, makes me feel this excited. The game released in North America, Europe, and Australia that November, and in Japan that December. It would be the first Silent Hill not to release with a Korean translation, though fans were quick to create one for the North American version of the game. It was a hit, enough so that by the next year a PS2 port was made. It had been a long, rough road, full of pitfalls and quicksand, but they'd made it. Between the efforts of Climax LA and Solent, Silent Hill Origins made it to the public, and did surprisingly well considering the incredible difficulties, setbacks, and restraints on the finished work. It's a miracle it was finished at all. But why did things go so wrong? We can speculate about events behind the scenes, and the public timeline of events seemed to match the theory of poor management at Climax LA. But more than that, the game had a lack of direction from the most important source, the very top. Ortel talks about how little guidance his team was given from the very start. It's easy when someone tells you, this is the box you can play in, don't go outside the box. There's no grand grimoire that the Japan-based Team Silent consults to keep the experience consistent. This leaves Climax with the tough job of trying to please not only the bosses at Konami, but also the legions of Silent Hill fans around the world. There was no grimoire, no guidance from Konami in Japan. While the team did discuss things with Yamaoka and his team, as some interviews say, from Yamaoka's side it seems clear the discussions were mostly music-based, and he was really the main one involved. No one above him was guiding the process at all. Konami wanted a Silent Hill game on the PSP, and that was all the guidance that was given. Imagine another big company with a big-name product sending their concept out into the world with no oversight. Nintendo would never allow anyone else to handle Mario or Zelda without some strict requirements. Square Enix is protective of Final Fantasy's brand and its style, even when it experiments with that style. Capcom certainly has to have some rules of thumb for Devil May Cry and Resident Evil, because when you have a brand this big, not following some kind of guideline is going to steer you wrong. Konami should have already learned that lesson with Silent Hill 4, the first game to experiment with going in a new direction. It had a different style, different gameplay and combat, a focus on exploration that downplayed puzzles, and it was the least successful title in the East and West. Japan hated it. Out West it reviewed well, but fans weren't sold. It would take a long time for it to become something of a cult classic of the series, but it's still a weird duck among the Silent Hill games. They sent the games west, presumably because Silent Hill 4 failed, and yet they learned nothing from the experience. Silent Hill 4 failed because it didn't follow the formula, and then they handed the project to people who had no experience with the formula, who'd never worked on Silent Hill before, and didn't give them a single outline, a single tip about what Silent Hill fans expected, and they just hoped for the best. No wonder Climax LA made a Resident Evil 4 clone with heavier action sequences, given the game had released and done well very recently, and it was kinda Silent Hill adjacent. What else were they supposed to do? They'd already dug deep into Silent Hill inspiration, taking influence from the first and second game, and Ortel even says that they were following in Silent Hill 4's footsteps. They were going heavier into action because that's what the previous game had done. The truth is, both Climax LA and Climax Solent had some talented people, and both versions of Origins, the original concept and its Frankenstein-esque rebirth, have some great ideas and concepts. But while the original concept, given the full support of a strong management staff and a game engine in a timely manner, might have been a good game, it wouldn't have been a Silent Hill game, and Konami could have told them that way quicker than they did, rather than waiting for public outcry to bring it to their attention. And something should be said for the team at Climax Solent, who were given the chance to take the easy road and simply smooth out the issues in what had already been made, or the hard route of redoing as much as they could to make it as close to a traditional Silent Hill game as possible. And they chose that hard route. Reading the LinkedIn pages of people who worked on this project reveals a lot about what it was like. Co-workers can leave reviews for each other, and people who work together on Origins at Solent tend to leave reviews that read like someone clapping another person on the back after surviving the zombie apocalypse. It sounds like it was a hard couple of months. While it didn't have to be like this, I am glad we have Silent Hill Origins. For all its lumps and wrinkles, it's a fun, unique experience, and it's a turning point in the history of the series, one that could have been the end of it entirely if Climax Solent hadn't managed to turn it around in the final inning. We might never have seen more Silent Hill games, and we certainly wouldn't have Shattered Memories. So a final thank you to everyone at Climax, here and across the sea, for working against the odds to bring the world the first portable Western Silent Hill game, which opened the door for all the games that came after.